Tatsuro Taira has successfully bounced back from his first ever professional loss, which we saw happen last October to former title challenger Brandon Royval. And he did so by defeating Hyunsung Park and becoming the first man to ever defeat him and handed him his first ever professional loss in the main event of UFC Vegas 108 at the Apex this past Saturday night. Tatsuro Taira is now 17-1 as a professional, with 13 of those 17 wins by way of stoppage. That includes this second round submission win over Park at the 1 minute and 6 second point of a fight that Tatsuro looked absolutely incredible in for the 6 minutes and 6 seconds of action that we got to see. He dropped Park early in the first round with 2 consecutive back-to-back right hands, was able to take the back of Park and dominate him on the ground for the remainder of the opening round, including having the body triangle and forcing in rear naked choke submission attempts, and he would ultimately secure that rear naked choke, albeit technically it's labeled as a face crank because it didn't get under the chin all the way of Park, and that forced him to tap for the first time in Park's entire career, because prior to this he was 10-0, including 2 victories in the UFC, and was the tournament winner of the Road to the UFC series out of Asia. And for the 18 professional bouts of Tatsuro Taira, 8 of them have been in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, with 7 of them by way of victory. And of course, as we previously alluded to, the only loss was to Brandon Royval, who is currently ranked in the top 3 of the flyweight division and was a former title challenger. And had he not lost to Joshua Van at UFC 317, he would have been a 2-time title challenger, because he would have been next up for Alexandre Pantoja's throne, but instead it is Van. So now the question is, what do we do with Tatsuro Taira in the aftermath of this victory? Because yes, it was a bounce back. He's into the win column once again. It was a second round submission. However, it was against a short notice opponent who had never taken on a ranked flyweight before in Hyunsung Park, who my hat is off to, by the way, for saving this main event and still has a very bright future ahead of him, if I do say so myself, considering he is just now entering those prime years and still has a 10-1 record with 9 of those 10 wins by way of stoppage. But the night on Saturday belonged to Tatsuro Taira, and of course he set his eyes directly toward the championship bout between Pantoja and Joshua Van, but I think he's going to have to at least win one more bout before getting his first crack at gold in this division. And there's 2 pretty clear options in my opinion on who the next opponent could be for Taira, and it's 1, Amir Albazi, who he was originally slated to face on August 2nd, and I'm not quite sure on the severity of the injury from the Amir Albazi side, but if it's something that he can recover from and fight with before the end of 2025, I'd say rebook this fight and have it happen, because it is number 6 versus number 4. However, if it is an injury that he will be sidelined with for a little bit longer than we would like, then I think it's pretty easy to make Tatsuro Taira versus the former 2-time champion Brandon Moreno. As a matter of fact, I would put this way ahead of rebooking Tatsuro versus Amir Albazi, because Moreno is that former 2-time champion. He lost the belt to the current sitting champion in Pantoja, will go on to lose to Brandon Royval, who also defeated Tatsuro, and now both of them have bounced back since their respective losses to Royval. For Taira, it was on Saturday with the submission over Park, and for Moreno, he's won back-to-back bouts over the aforementioned Amir Albazi and Steve Erceg, the former title challenger. That came in March of this year. That is absolutely the fight to make right now in this flyweight division. It's Tatsuro Taira, it's Brandon Moreno, it's a 5-round main event of a fight night card, it's a big-time featured bout on a pay-per-view card, and the winner of that gets the winner of Pantoja versus Van. Now, of course, I realize that if Van beats Pantoja, being that he's defended the belt 4 times, he likely gets an immediate rematch, but you get the point. There's no easier, clear-cut number 1 contender fight, dare I say, in any of the other divisions right now, at least that includes 2 available people, than Brandon Moreno, the assassin baby, versus Tatsuro Taira. Mexico versus Japan, 2 markets that continue to surge in terms of their star power and athletes in the UFC, and the 2 most successful fighters from those 2 respective countries clashing head-to-head. It checks every single box from an X's and O's and storyline perspective. That's the fight to make in the aftermath of UFC Vegas 108. But do you agree with me? Let me know down in the comments below, and go ahead and give me your early predictions while you're at it. And now that we're done with the main event discussion of UFC Vegas 108, let's jump into the rest of the card and talk about some of the other notable performances and fights. And we start in the lightweight division because we saw 2 back-to-back absolute bangers in this 155-pound weight class, where both of them were awarded fight of the night. First was the co-main event between Chris Duncan and Mateusz Rebecki, where Duncan would earn the unanimous decision win after a back-and-forth 15-minute bloody war. Duncan is now 5-1 in the UFC, with that lone loss coming in February of last year to Manuel Torres, where he would be submitted in the first round, and since then has won 3 straight fights. The latter 2 heading into UFC Vegas 108 were both submission wins over Balaji Oki and Jordan Vucinic, and now this war with Mateusz Rebecki, who is extremely dangerous. You could make a very clear argument that Chris Duncan should be getting a ranked opponent in his next bout, maybe someone like a Grant Dawson or Joao Alvarez, maybe even someone who's ranked a little bit higher but coming off of a loss like a Nato Moicano. It's clear that Chris Duncan is going to be involved in some very fun fights and be in some very competitive back and forth scraps. Not to mention that out of his 16 professional bouts, he has still only gone the distance 4 times, with 12 of the 16 getting ended early. And maybe you could even say that his next opponent should be the next man that we're going to be talking about, and that was the winner of the second fight of the night in the featured bout at 155, Esteban Ribovics. He would improve to 4-2 in the UFC, with a loss coming in his debut in March of 2023 and in his most recent bout in March of this year to Nasrat Haqparast, where that one was a very close split decision. But now he holds a knockout victory over Terrence McKinney, a decision over Daniel Zellhuber, which is aging very well, and this war that he had with Elves Brener on Saturday night, where much like the co-main event, they will go toe-to-toe on the feet for 15 minutes, battering and brutalizing one another on the feet. And this isn't the first time that we've seen Esteban get a fight of the night and go to war, because he did the same thing with the aforementioned Daniel Zellhuber fight at Noche UFC last September in one of the best fights of 2024. 29 years old, 15-2 overall, only gone the distance 5 times in those 17 bouts. And Chris Duncan, 32 years old in his prime as well, and 14-2. I feel like that could very easily be the fight to make at the end of the year. Chris Duncan, Esteban Ribovics, one last go around. The winner gets a top 15 fighter, or damn, maybe they even get a number next to their name in general. Karol Rosa bounced back from her loss at the beginning of the year at UFC 311 to Eileen Perez with a decision win, and pretty dominant at that, over Nora Cornolle, who was ranked number 12 heading into the bout, and Karol defended her top 10 spot. Round 1 was pretty back and forth, pretty competitive. I felt that you could have made a case for either woman in that round, but in rounds 2 and 3, it was all Karol Rosa, because she got Nora Cornolle down, and Nora was absolutely helpless on the ground and on her back. She could not scramble, she could not get up, she could not change positions. Karol Rosa threatened with many submission attempts and landed brutal elbows and ground and pound strikes, en route to getting a 10-8 scorecard from 2 judges and a 3-1 30-27 across the board from the other. Karol is still just 30 years old, and she is 8-4 in the UFC, and as I said on Friday, her losses: Eileen Perez, who's number 7 in the bantamweight division, Irene Aldana, a former title challenger, Norma Dumont, a future title challenger more than likely, and Sarah McMahon, an Olympic silver medalist and former title challenger. Those are her losses. Outside of that, she has been perfect in the UFC, and the women's bantamweight division desperately needs newer faces to continue climbing the ranks, such as the aforementioned Eileen Perez, and now Karol Rosa, who holds her spot in the top 10 and should definitely fight forward in the rankings next. The problem for her, even though it's not a problem, it's actually a great thing for the division as a whole, is that there's actually a lot of fights booked right now. The former champion Raquel Pennington, who sits at number 2, is taking on the number 4 ranked Norma Dumont at Noche UFC. The number 3 ranked Ketlin Vieira's coming off of a win over Macy Chasson, who's ranked number 5 and already been rebooked and will be fighting Yannis Santos at number 9 next. So Karol may have to wait a little bit to see what happens with some of these fights that we just talked about, but she is definitely in the conversations, and if she gets one more win, can enter nearer to title contention in the women's bantamweight division. The all-time leader in welterweight wins for the UFC notched another one on his resume, and that is Neil Magny, who after losing round 1 of his fight to Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, bounced back in round 2 and got the finish with 21 seconds left in that round via TKO. That's his first win since January of 2024, where he had another comeback win, that one much more crazy and against a younger up-and-comer in Mike Malott, and since then had lost back-to-back fights via knockout to Michael Morales and Carlos Prates, so he had been taking on nothing but young up-and-coming killers in this welterweight division. Now he was able to take a step back against another veteran in Dos Santos and get a big-time win, and that was his 30th as a professional mixed martial artist. My hat is off to the Haitian sensation, who continues to get the job done at 38 years young, aging like a fine wine. We had another bounce back from a first professional loss on the card, and that was another Japanese fighter, this time Rinya Nakamura, who improved to 10-1 with a brutal finish over Nathan Fletcher, and it just took 1 minute and 2 seconds as he landed a nasty kick right to the liver that would shut down Fletcher, have him backing up, and Rinya would come in and pounce with the ground and pound strikes to finish him off. He's 30 years old, right in his prime, and has finished 7 of his 10 victories and has an insane pedigree in wrestling. Nakamura at this bantamweight division, yes, after that loss to Muin Gafurov, showed some weaknesses, but still has a very high ceiling and has a lot of potential to live up to, in my opinion. But it just so happens that he's in one of, if not the deepest and best divisions in all the UFC right now, bantamweight. The 27-year-old Andrey Pulyaev made good on his sophomore outing in the UFC after losing his debut to Christian Leroy Duncan in March. He got the second round knockout in his second bout against Klein, and he now holds a record of 10-3 and has finished 8 of those 10 victories in this middleweight division. We have someone to keep our eyes on in the outside looking in of the rankings. And last but not least, we have yet again another fighter who bounced back from their first professional loss, this time not out of Japan, but out of the United States, and that was Austin Bashi, who is 14-1 now as a professional and still is only 23 years old. How bright is the sport of mixed martial arts? Look at the talent that we have mentioned in today's episode and all of the time left on their fighting clocks that they still have. Bashi would beat the short notice opponent Yannis in the first round via rear naked choke, and he has finished 9 of his 14 professional wins, with 6 of the 9 by way of sub, and all 6 of his submissions are by way of rear naked choke. We have a specialist on our hands when he gets the back of someone down on the mat. So that is it for the UFC Vegas 108 recap, and I want to hear your thoughts on this card down in the comments below. Give me your takeaways, give me your favorite performances, and let me know what you think is next for some of the big winners on this card. If you enjoyed this recap, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because we are currently on the road to reaching 1,000 subscribers before the end of 2025, and any and all support is greatly appreciated. To go along with these weekly recaps of the most meaningful results from every card, I also break down and preview the biggest and best fights heading into each weekend, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA. And if you're an audio listening person, no worries, I've got you covered there on Spotify, Apple, and more, because every Monday and Friday podcast episodes release there. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.